At 17, I always believed that I had endured the bulk of life's betrayals until that moment. Living with my mother, my stepdad, and his two children, I always felt like a stranger in my own home, waiting for some miracle that would make things different. My step siblings, Jackson and Emma, and I were never close. Though Jackson, who is 18, and Emma, who is 15, go to the same high school as me, we don't run in the same circles or share any friends. It wasn't because I hadn't tried. On the contrary, I'd put in the effort. But in the end, I was more of a glorified guest than family. When my mom first met my stepdad, I was around 8 years old. The two dated for several years before they married 3 years ago, but it wasn't the wedding that marked the beginning of my new life with them. No, we'd all been living together for nearly 6 years by then. I knew that my father, who'd passed away when I was very young, had been the love of my mother's life. She always spoke highly of him, but sadly, her words meant little compared to her actions, which would soon reveal just how expendable I was in her eyes. My dad had been diagnosed with leukemia when he was 27, a reality that left him little time to prepare, but he had made sure that I'd be taken care of. He'd set aside an education fund for me, ensuring I wouldn't have to rely on anyone financially, even in his absence. His lawyer managed the fund until I'd turn 18, at which point I'd have full control over it. Though my mom assured me she'd be there to guide me, her words felt empty. In the early days, I longed for a tight-knit family. Moving into my stepdad's home, I expected warmth and connection, and I held out hope for years, hoping that we'd eventually bond. I kept telling myself that it would come in time, that we'd just grown up differently. But even after all these years, we stayed distant, not from any overt hostility, but from a lingering coldness, a lack of investment in each other. For Jackson and Emma, I was just someone who shared their space, but not their hearts. There was never any resentment in their attitude toward me, but they didn't go out of their way to make me feel welcome either. Slowly, I began to realize that my expectations for this big, happy family were simply my own dreams, and they didn't share them. Meanwhile, my mother seemed to have found her place with them. They treated her differently. My stepdad doted on her, his children accepted her as part of the family, and they all settled into their roles easily. Though I told myself not to, I couldn't help feeling left out, especially since my mother seemed to thrive in the warmth of my stepfamily, while I shivered on the sidelines. My step-sibling's mother, from what I'd heard, had been something of a nightmare for them. She had taken my stepdad's money and vanished, leaving him to pick up the pieces of their broken home and raise the kids alone. So when my mother arrived, bringing compassion and joy into their lives, they were more than ready to welcome her in. I'd always felt that, in their eyes, she was the final piece that completed their family puzzle, while I was the piece that didn't fit. I didn't want to make a big deal of it, but the years of being overlooked left a bitter taste. The moment that finally shattered this brittle family harmony came when I was preparing for college applications. I'd been researching potential universities and weighing my options, knowing that my college fund would support me. I'd always felt secure in that knowledge, but a conversation with my mother turned everything upside down. She approached me one day and, in a tone both demanding and pleading, told me that my stepdad hadn't been able to save enough for Jackson and Emma's college education. As a result, she expected me to share my father's education fund with them. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My father had left that money specifically for me, entrusting me with a chance to build my future. And now, my mother was asking me to sacrifice that future for people who barely acknowledged my presence. I knew what I had to say, and I said it. I wouldn't be sharing the fund. I calmly told my mother that I didn't consider my step-siblings as family, not in the way she seemed to think, and I saw no reason to give away what my dad had left me to. Her response was explosive. She screamed at me, calling me selfish and ungrateful. But for once, I didn't flinch. I told her point blank that if being selfish meant standing up for myself and my future, then I was okay with it. Her double standards were mind boggling. My mother had never once called out the cold, distant behavior of my stepfamily towards me. Yet the moment I asserted my boundaries, I was the villain. She yelled at me until she was out of breath, and I just stood there, watching her, feeling a deep sadness settle into my bones. When her voice finally calmed, she delivered the blow that would change everything. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You have 1 week to reconsider your decision. If you're still this ungrateful by then, you'll have to find somewhere else to live." She wasn't even joking. I was her only child, and yet she was prepared to kick me out over this stuff. Stunned and heartbroken, I realized that I couldn't stay in this house any longer. And in that moment, I made up my mind to leave. I reached out to a couple of close friends, explaining the situation and asking if I could stay with them temporarily. One of my friends even suggested I talk to her cousin, who was also looking for a roommate for college. Thankfully, her cousin and I clicked instantly, and we began planning to rent a place together once college started. In the days that followed, my mother and the rest of my step family acted like I didn't exist. When I entered a room, everyone would go quiet or make a quick exit. They'd give me side glances filled with disgust, as if I were something they'd scraped off their shoes. The silent treatment, the cold shoulders, everything felt so degrading and isolating. I was effectively being ostracized in my own home. I never felt more unwanted, more invisible, and I knew that staying there would only break me further. The day my mother came to ask if I'd changed my mind, I told her exactly what I decided. I told her that I'd found a place to stay and that I'd be moving out soon. I told her that, after everything she'd put me through, I wanted nothing more to do with her or her family. Her response was predictable. She screamed at me, telling me that she couldn't believe she'd raised such an ungrateful child and that she wanted me out immediately. I packed my things and left that very day. Leaving, however, wasn't enough for me. I wanted to make sure everyone knew what my mother had done. She'd chosen her stepchildren over me, her only biological daughter, and I wanted to let the world know just how hurtful that choice was. I made a post detailing everything: the years of exclusion, the demand for my father's fund, the threat to kick me out, and the final, heartbreaking realization that my mother didn't care for me as much as she did for her new family. The post went viral, and the backlash was immediate. My mother's friends began reaching out, shocked by her actions. She tried calling and texting me, accusing me of ruining her life and shaming her publicly, but I didn't respond. In her texts, she told me that I was being vindictive, that my father would be ashamed of me, that I'd let her down in ways she never thought possible. But I didn't care. For the first time, I was free, and the weight of my decision felt liberating. With the support of my friends, I began to build a new life. I eventually blocked my mother's number, choosing peace over her manipulative guilt trips. In the following weeks, I learned that she'd even gone so far as to pack up my remaining belongings in a trash bag and dump them in the living room of my friend's house, as if to cement the idea that I was no longer welcome in her life. My friend's parents were livid, but I only felt a sad sense of closure. Months passed, and I threw myself into college applications, determined to make something of my life, free from the hurt my mother had caused. I was accepted into my top choice college with a scholarship, and the sense of pride and relief was overwhelming. I'd managed to start a new chapter on my terms, and for the first time, I felt hopeful about my future. My mother has never reached out since, and while I sometimes feel a pang of regret, I know I made the right choice. The love and support I received from my friends during those dark days showed me that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who value you for who you are, not what they can take from you. I look back now, grateful for the freedom I found in standing up for myself, and I look forward to building a life filled with love, support, and people who genuinely care about me. The scars my mother left on my heart are fading, replaced by the warmth of new friendships and the strength I found within myself. I know now that I am capable of creating my own happiness, no matter how others try to diminish it.